The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, I hope you're all having a great week so far. Thank you for joining us today for our quarterly Faithful Families webinar series. My name is Julia Yao, the Faithful Families Program Specialist, and I'll be your moderator for today. Before we get started, let me quickly go over a couple of reminders for this webinar. If you haven't done so already, please mute your mic so we can minimize any background noise. And don't forget that the question box is available to you during the presentation. If we have time we will have time at the end for Q&A, so feel free to type in any questions or comments along the way. We have two awesome presenters from North Carolina State University, and I'd like to share a little bit about their background and the work that they're doing. Deandra Alford is the Foods and Nutrition Extension Associate at the Department of Agricultural and Human Sciences at NC State University. In this role, she provides programmatic expertise on the intersection of food, nutrition, and health, with an emphasis on consumer food preparation. Deandra is involved in projects that support healthy food access in a variety of settings, including food pantries, child care centers, and food retail. Her work involves providing program support, material development, and relevant training for North Carolina Cooperative Extension staff and partners in the areas of food and nutrition programming. And Laura Lee Jones serves as the coordinator of the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, otherwise known as FNAP, through NC State University Extension. The program serves limited resource families and school-age youth by providing hands-on educational settings with the goals to improve dietary intake, nutritional practices, food resource management practices, food safety practices, and to increase daily physical activity. Laura Lee is passionate about serving the needs of families and youth, and she's one of the lead authors for the curricula, FNAP's Families Eating Smart and Moving More, and for our very own Faithful Families curriculum. She's also a member of the development team for Faithful Families and the co-director of the Southern Regional Nutrition Education and Obesity Prevention Center for Excellence. Thank you both for being part of today's webinar. As you can tell by today's webinar title and description, we're going to focus on the healthy eating side of Faithful Families, and we'll dive deeper into one particular style of eating, otherwise known as the Mediterranean way. So Deandra and Laura Lee will describe the Mediterranean eating pattern and explain why it is beneficial for your health. They will then take you on a tour of the Med Instead of Meds for Better Health website, which is such a great resource for getting to know the Mediterranean style of eating. It also houses a body of Mediterranean style recipes they can try at home and with the participants in your program. So our presenters will also provide suggestions as to how you can adapt these recipes for your Faithful Families classes. So with that said, let's get started. I'll turn the presentation over to Deandra.
All right, well, thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to be able to speak with you all about the Mediterranean eating pattern and Med Instead of Meds for better health. Sorry. And sorry, I think I might. Okay. All right, so I think you all can see my screen now, so that's good. So let's go ahead and get started talking about Med Instead of Meds for better health and the Mediterranean eating pattern. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties with advancing my slides. Okay, so two-thirds is the amount of chronic disease that can be prevented by lifestyle changes, specifically through diet and exercise. And I like to share that number because it is quite significant when you think about the amount that can be prevented that way. So why is it that people aren't, if we know that diet and exercise could have such a significant impact on chronic disease, why is it that people aren't eating healthier? And the reasons that we find might be familiar to many of you, which is people feel stuck, they feel that healthy eating is too hard, too confusing, too expensive, not delicious, and they don't have time. They really just don't have time. And on top of all of that, culinary literacy is currently at an all-time low. So knowing that, these are the reasons why people feel stuck when it comes to healthy eating, I'm going to take the next 6 slides just to show what it is that we should be eating. And you'll see that it really doesn't have to be as hard or complicated as it can often feel or be to us. So when it comes to eating, we should be eating this, a lot of this, these, a lot of this, these, some of this, and overall, this is what it looks like to have a healthy eating pattern. So you can see we have a lot of fruits and vegetables on the screen. That's the basis of a strong, healthy eating pattern. So when it comes to chronic disease, knowing what we know about 2/3 of chronic disease being preventable and largely around diet and exercise, we need to ask ourselves, do we want to deal with chronic disease with PANS or with pills? With med instead of meds for better health, which is the resource that we're going to be exploring today together. So that same idea, do we want to deal with it with med, which is the med way of eating, for example, or meds or medications, so PANS versus pills. So what is the med way of eating, or the Mediterranean eating pattern? So the med way of eating includes fruits and vegetables, so lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of variety in the fruits and vegetables you eat. So a diet just based in fruits and vegetables, having that be the base of your diet. It includes whole grains, as you can see here, so choosing whole grains over refined grains. It includes eating plant-based proteins like beans and legumes, so having beans and legumes take a strong part in your diet. It includes eating fish and seafood as well. 2 to 3 times a week is what we recommend. And then also seasoning your food with herbs and spices, so to give you flavor to your food and just add to the deliciousness of the food that you're eating. And then it also can include wine as well. So this is an optional part, but it is definitely an option that's included in the med way of eating. And then we also have nuts, so including nuts and seeds in your diet. And cooking and eating with oils, so vegetable-based oils like olive oil, canola oil, or other vegetable oils. So replacing like butters and such with that type of cooking oil. And then in addition to diet, it also includes lifestyle activities such as physical activity, being physically active, enjoying the foods that you're eating, so taking time to enjoy that food that you're eating and enjoying the people you're eating with. And then also it limits added sugars in the diet, so limiting those added sugars. And then when we look at the med way of eating, we also see, so when we want to judge an eating pattern and see, where it stands, we can look at what it promotes in terms of superfoods or positive foods, and then also how it limits other foods that might have negative impacts on our health. So you can see here the med way of eating. It encourages all of those top superfoods, so fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, whole grains, vegetable oils, fish and beans and legumes, and it limits added sugar, meats, red meats, as well as saturated fats and heavily processed foods. And the med way of eating, the way it gets its name is that it's based traditionally, or it's based on how people traditionally ate in the Mediterranean region. So the way that people on the region that borders around the Mediterranean Sea traditionally ate. So those historic eating patterns have been is what we are talking about when it comes to the med way of eating. So it doesn't necessarily mean how currently people eat in those places, but how they've traditionally eaten in those places. So even though it's based around that, though, the med way is not about a flavor profile. It's not necessarily only Mediterranean style food. It can be an Indian style food. It can be Mexican style food, or really overall, it's just delicious food. So food that can be delicious and in any style that you want it. And also on top of that, typical Italian or Greek foods are not always consistent with eating the med way. So what we might think of as typical Mediterranean, or how people are currently might eat in the Mediterranean, isn't necessarily what we're talking about. So you can see here the pasta, which is thought of as typically Italian, the same as the pizza, with the white flour and meats and cheese, not what we're talking about when it comes to the med way of eating. And also the kebabs there, high in meat, that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about the med way. We're talking about that traditional diet. And then also, when it comes to med way of eating, we're not talking about processed foods that are labeled Mediterranean or labeled with olive oil. This is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about processed foods that are packaged like this. What we're talking about is cooking and eating real food. And we don't want you to get hung up either on magical ingredients like olive oil or things like that. The magic is in all of the food choices that make up the med way of eating. So really, the magic is here in all the foods that make up the traditional way of eating in the Mediterranean region. So you can see from here, a diet strong in fruits and vegetables, have some fish in there, nuts in there. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the med way of eating. So to get back to looking at what that med way of eating includes, I'd like to share these pyramids with you. So this might be familiar, the food pyramid, which has been a way of sharing what our diet should include. The food pyramid has been a traditional way of looking at that in the past. So here you can see on the left from the ECU School of Medicine, so Eastern Carolina University School of Medicine, they have it represented in verbs or in verbiage or words, and on the right they have it in pictures. So both of these are the same, just a different way of looking at it. And both on the bottom here you can see it's built on physical activity, on enjoying foods together. And then on top of that, we've got the plant-based foods. We've got fruits and vegetables, whole grains, olive oil, beans, nuts, legumes, seeds, herbs, and spices. So that's the bulk of the diet when we're talking about the med way of eating. And then right above that, you've got fish and seafood, so including those often, about at least 2 times a week. So including that in your diet. And then above that, we've got poultry, specifically white meat poultry, as well as eggs and cheese and yogurt, so in a little smaller box there. And right above at the apex, at the very smallest box, you've got meats and sweets. So still room in your diet for those, but consuming them less often. And then on the side here, you can see a wine is allowed as well in moderation, but making your go-to water drinking, or your go-to drinking thing to drink, water. So making water your go-to. So now that we've looked at these visual representations, I want to share one more with you, which is out of Harvard University. It's the Healthy Eating Plate. And it's just another way of looking at what we just looked at, but more in that my plate fashion. So we've got vegetables and fruits making up half of your plate, whole grains, healthy proteins, let's be like fish, white meat poultry, beans and nuts, and then making water your go-to beverage, and using healthy oils. So instead of butter, for example, you'd be using olive oil, canola oil in your cooking or in salads or whatever you're using oils within. So why should you go med? Now that we know what med includes, like what eating med looks like, why should you do it? And there is lots of research supporting the med way of eating. And you can see here just a visual graphic of the areas that med research shows that med is able to help reduce the risk of many chronic diseases. So this healthy eating pattern has lots of research supporting the fact that it does help to decrease the risk of many chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease, some forms of cancer, also protecting against cognitive decline and protecting against Alzheimer's, protecting against eye health, or the degeneration of eye health, and protecting against type 2 diabetes and blood pressure, helping to manage blood pressure. So lots of medical reasons and research, strong research-based reasons why the med way of eating is such a great dietary option or eating pattern for people. And then on top of all that, we've got all that wonderful research supporting the strength of the Mediterranean diet. But we also, what sets the med way apart from other diet patterns is that it's simple, it's delicious, and it's satisfying. So it's simple ingredients, simple cooking techniques, just simple to do and to accomplish, and then it's delicious. You get to cook your food in olive oil, so you can see these green beans are sauteed in olive oil with lemon zest to give them even more taste to them. So delicious foods, and then it's satisfying because you're eating foods that are higher in fat than like a low-fat diet, for example. So like eating nuts, eating whole grains, which are the full grain, they're going to be more satiating to you. So for these three reasons, this is what sets the Medway apart. So for our part, with the Med Instead of Meds resource that we're going to be exploring together today, what we have done, you can see at the bottom there, the Med Instead of Meds resource and the website, we have put together 7 simple steps to eating the Medway. So helping take people from how they currently eat or where they're currently at with their diet and their food choices to help them get closer to eating the Medway and making those healthy options a part of their lives. So these steps include changing your protein, swapping your fats, eating more vegetables, eating more fruit, snacking on nuts and seeds, making your grains whole, and rethinking your sweets. And all of the resources that we're going to explore today on medinsteadofmeds.com are all revolve around these 7 simple steps. So you will see these in the Med resources that we'll be exploring today together. So let's go ahead and explore medinsteadofmeds.com together. So we're going to go ahead and explore here together, and then after this webinar is done, I encourage you all to visit medinsteadofmeds.com and do a little additional exploring on your own. So medinsteadofmeds.com, this is the home page, and I'm going to take you right through the top here through the menu bar, and we're going to start with recipes. So recipes. So once you click on that recipe page, or the top tab at the top that we just looked at on the home page, it takes you to the recipe page, which is here, and you can see that we've got over 100 recipes, all that fit around the Medway of eating. So all that include those 7 steps that we were talking about, and all of the components of the Medway of eating that we looked at the beginning of the webinar. And the way we've got the recipes categorized is by different eating events, so like breakfast, dessert, entrees, sides, soups, salads, drinks, appetizers, snacks, all that such. And then you can also search by that here at the top, or you can search here on the side. You can also browse by searching in the search box here at the bottom, excuse me, or at the top. And then there's also a button here where if you click on it, it'll bring up the newest recipes first as well. So as we add more recipes, which we're constantly doing, you can see what's new to the site the next time you come back. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a moment as we explore the website. You can also search recipes by their simple step. So for example, changing your protein, swapping your fats. You could see all recipes that are associated with changing your protein, or all that are associated with swapping your fats. So again, back to looking through the website together. Here at the top, we've gotten to Science of Eating Med. And this is that same graphic that I shared with you earlier in the presentation, and this takes you to the primary resources. So if you click these little down buttons, the primary resources of where that research that is coming from, or where it's the research resources. So you can explore even more about these topics and how they relate to these different themes. So around decreasing the risk of cancer, for example, you can look up the top references that we've put there. And on top of what we have here, there's even more out in the literature. We've just highlighted some of the top ones. Now on to tips and tools. This is the tips and tools section of the webpage, and it highlights a handout which is available in multiple resolutions for printing. So this is something that is free and available for download and also to print if you want to share within your communities. It's a great resource that gives an overview of the Mediterranean way of eating and more information on what that looks like. So it can be a great resource in with your Faithful Families classes, with working to encourage people to eat healthy in your community, however you want to utilize that resource. And then on top of that, on the tips and tools page, we also have a set of webinar mini-series, which these are all already recorded webinars. There's 5 of them, and they go through the Med way of eating. So today I gave you a brief overview of the Med way of eating, but this first one gives a more thorough, in-depth overview of the Mediterranean diet, and then the next 4 give overviews of all those 7 steps. So swapping your fats, changing your protein. You'll get more information from those webinars, and those are presented by Dr. Carolyn Dunn, who is the department head and nutrition specialist here at NC State University and NC State University Extension. So, and just to give you an idea of what those webinars are again, you'll see, because they wouldn't fit all on that last page, these are the 5 webinars in the series. And like I said, there's an intro, and then the next 4 cover the 7 steps. So you can see that there by the image. And then finally, with the webinars, another way to access them is by on the home page, this top button here. If you press on that, it will take you directly to where the webinars are located, which is on the Eat Smart, Move More, Weigh Less website, which they have a lot of pre-recorded webinars there. This is just 5 of 5 of many that exist at the Nutrition Decisions Eat Smart, Move More, Weigh Less site. So if you go there, you can see those 5 webinars as well as any other webinar that Dr. Dunn has produced and available there. So you can see the first one right now is Diets, Fat, and Facts. So if you go to this site, you would just scroll down until you get to the 5 Med Instead of Med webinars. Or you can go straight to them on the Tips and Tools page, but just didn't want people to get confused or lost on the site. So next I want to share with you on the site, we have, again, here you can see this top button. When you press on that, it'll take you to the 7 simple steps to med videos. So these are the 7 simple steps videos. And what these do is they're about 2 to 3 minutes each. And each one of them looks at a specific one of the 7 steps. So this one here is change your protein, which is the first of the 7 steps. And each of the videos include what we call med flips and med tips. So med flips show you how to flip a traditional, what you would think of as like a typical food you might eat. So like a typical burger into a Mediterranean burger. So taking that, for example, here we have a tuna burger, and so you can take your regular typical American burger and flip it into this tuna burger, which would be consistent with eating the Med way. So this gives you ideas on ways that you can flip for each of the 7 steps, traditional or classic meals, I guess, into more Mediterranean meals. And then you can also see here tips, which are, or in the videos, each video has tips on how to help you use one of the 7 steps in your life. So what are some tips to changing your protein? How can you change your protein from red meat to plant-based proteins, seafood, and white meat chicken? What are some tips to do that? So all of the videos include that for you. And so you can see here as well, once you play the video, it'll take you to the page where each individual video is at, and this one again is change your protein. And then at the bottom below the video are all the recipes from our website which are featured in that video. So once you're looking through and you're like, oh wow, that Mediterranean tuna salad looked amazing, then you can go ahead and click on the recipe there and check out what goes into it and make your own Mediterranean tuna salad. And then now I want to spend a little bit of time exploring the Medway recipes together. And before we do that, I'm going to highlight some of our Medway recipes for you. But first I want to just talk about some budget access considerations when we're talking about Medway recipes, and really all recipes in general, but in this way specific to the Medway recipes. First thing I want to talk about is as your food choices shift, so will your food expenses. So as you start eating more med, or as you start moving towards healthier eating patterns, you're going to be shifting the way that you spend your money. So when we say, eat fish 2 to 3 times a week, we're not saying eat fish 2 to 3 times a week on top of all the meat that you might already be consuming or things like that. It's ways to switch the way you're eating to eat more med. So as you eat less red meat, as that consumption and expense goes down, you'll be able to shift your purchases and the food you're eating towards plant-based proteins and fish. And so things that when we think about expenses, we want to think about that is how your food dollar will shift as your plate contents shift as well. So same thing here with processed foods. As you decrease the amount of processed foods in your diet, then that you'd be increasing fruits and vegetables and nuts. So the same way you shift the foods, your food expense would shift. And same with refined grain products, shifting to whole grains. So when you're thinking about Medway recipes, I think it's also important, or when you're sharing it with participants or people in your classes, if there's concern about expenses, thinking about it in a global sense too, like as we shift the foods we eat, our food expenses shift as well. So it's not necessarily an increase of types of food you're buying, it's just differences in what you'll be buying. So I just wanted to throw that out there first. And then on top of that, I did want to give some shopping tips related to the Medway of eating. First being frozen, canned, fresh. That's something that we hear a lot. Which is best? What should I be eating? And for example, I'll use fruits and vegetables for example. Frozen, canned, fresh. What we want is for you to be increasing the amount of fruits and vegetables you're eating. So all 3 of those work. If the canned beans are going to help you eat more beans, then the canned beans are the way to go, right? Same with frozen vegetables or fruits. Or with fish, a great budget option is often canned fish, so canned tunas and such, for example. So those are all great options, and those are things to consider when you're thinking about your food budget, and also spoilage and stuff like that. For having, knowing that frozen might last longer, and that might be the way to go for you for certain reasons. Same with canned. So just thinking about it in that way. Also, another shopping tip is thinking about where you're buying stuff from. And so, for example, online shopping, bargain grocery stores, sales at your local grocery store, trying to capitalize on all those things. So for online shopping, the reason I put that up there is in terms of whole grains, for example, if you're in an area where the only whole grain you're able to find is brown rice, an option might be, which brown rice is great, use the brown rice, but another option could also be, if you want to have more diversity in the whole grains you're eating, is looking online and shopping there and having it sent to you as well. So there's many food purchasing options that you can do that way that can save on your budget, because you can get products cheaper potentially online, or if it's an access issue, it can also help you increase your access to different foods as well. And then bargain grocery stores. So, a great idea for getting, for example, for olive oil, going to a home goods store, oftentimes they will have discounted olive oil or that type of thing, or same with whole grains. I would also encourage store sales. So, my local grocery store will sometimes have seafood sales, and so I try to take advantage of that by buying my seafood at that point in time and freezing seafood as well. And then community and church gardens, so thinking of that as another option for getting fresh produce. If you're in an area that has limited access to fresh produce and you don't have space in your home for a garden either. I also encourage home gardenings. I love home gardening. I'm a big fan of that. So I think that's also a great thing that I didn't put up here, but is another way to think about supplementing the foods that you might have access to or have in your pantry. So those are some shopping tips I wanted to share to help with price cutting and access as well. And I think they fit with med, but I think they fit with, you know, all food preparation as well. And then using recipes as a guide is another budget access consideration I wanted to share. We're going to look right after this at specific recipes, but these recipes, you know, they're things that can be modified. So for example, if a recipe calls for farro or whole grain couscous or an avocado, and that's not something you have, or it's not something you would prefer something else, like that's not your favorite fruit, avocado, you are able to make modifications, right? You could use that brown rice that we talked about, which is very accessible in most places. You can make those switch outs to make that recipe accessible and affordable for you. And also you can switch out, for example, with the avocado, if you want to switch that out with a different vegetable or fruit, you could do that as well. So just using the recipes as a guide to meet your needs and your food and consumption needs is the important part. And then using simple equipment and techniques. So our recipes largely use very simple equipment and techniques because we do want the food to be accessible and be able to be enjoyed by many people. And with equipment and techniques, if they're with these recipes or really any recipes, thinking about ways that you can make equipment more accessible. If there is an item that you think might not be something that all the people you're working with have access to, you can either utilize something else in place of that, or so for example, one thing, I don't have a lemon or lime squeezer at home, and often what I'll use is just the back end of a large spoon and either a bowl or sometimes I'll use a cup to collect the lemon juice. But that way it's something where I don't want people to feel like they can't make that because they don't have that lemon or lime squeezer, but thinking of ways to utilize tools that you do have on hand. And like I said, all our Medway recipes really do use simple equipment and tools and techniques, but just something to keep in mind for these as well as any recipes, how you can make any items that might be a hindrance accessible to the groups you're working with. So now that we've looked at some of these budget access considerations, let's look at some of the recipes together. So first off, the Medway recipes, I wanted to start off by sharing the mushroom beef taco and the mushroom beef burger. And both of these items, they do utilize red meat, but they cut the meat in half by making half of the burger or taco with mushrooms. So you're bolstering your vegetables and you're decreasing your red meat. And both of these are on our website, just like all the recipes we're going to look at today. But I think the reason I wanted to share this with you is because it's a really great intro, I think, to the Medway. Or if you're, if you or your family might be hesitant to try it, this is a way to try to increase your vegetables and taking that shift from eating the proteins you might be eating now to more healthier proteins. It's like a baby step towards that. So it really can help give people a taste of eating the Medway, or to eat more med, I should say, would be like increasing your vegetables, but in a way that they might not be as over the head, like in your face, I guess, at the very beginning. So this is a very good beginner recipe that I definitely recommend, and it's just replacing half the meat with mushrooms. And then here we have the Mediterranean tuna salad, which this bulks up an old favorite with vegetables and olive oil. So it makes it healthier. It already has the tuna in there, which the Medway calls for, but it also increases the amount of vegetables that you'd see in, I guess, a traditional tuna salad, and it replaces that mayo with olive oil. So it's a healthier option, and it's delicious. This is a family favorite in my household. I definitely recommend this and the other two recipes, but these are things to try, and they're familiar recipes that have that med twist on them, so they might be good starting points too. And next I want to share in regards to vegetables, making vegetables craveable and convenient, right? So oven roasted vegetables is a really wonderful technique. It's very simple. You cut up some vegetables, toss it in olive oil, put it on a baking sheet, and throw it in the oven for 30 minutes, right, at 425. So you've got a really simple recipe here, and the caramelization that takes place when you roast vegetables makes vegetables delicious. It's just a very delicious way to eat vegetables, I guess. And using that olive oil as well as herbs and spices also helps increase that flavor. So simple technique and very flavorful. And then down here, sauteed squash and onions. So sauteed squash and onions gives it that flavor and simple technique, and again, very delicious. So thinking of ways to add those vegetables into your diet in a way, or other med components into your diet in a way that's simple and convenient, and especially for vegetables, making them craveable and convenient is a way to help people eat the Medway and utilize these Medway recipes. And then using recipes as a guide. So this is one of the points I was talking about earlier. So here we have the vegetable omelet, brown rice salad, whole wheat pasta with beans and greens, whole wheat pasta with pesto and vegetables. So these are all on our website again, but these are all really easy recipes to make your own and use the recipe as a guide. So with the omelet, the recipe calls for mushrooms and spinach, right? But you could replace those out if you're not a fan of mushrooms, you're not a spinach person. You could replace those out with other fruits or other vegetables in your omelet. And again, an omelet is something that's a very familiar food to many people too. So it's also a good way to kind of get started, and also increasing a good way to increase vegetables in your breakfast meal as well. And then the brown rice salad, I love this salad. It has almost every component in it from the Medway except for nuts, which you could add nuts if you wanted to. But it's very simple. It's just brown rice. I think that's black beans. And then you have cut up herbs and oranges there, and avocado is in there as well. And you could really replace any of those components, change the brown rice to whole grain couscous, right, or to quinoa. You could change the type of bean. You could change the type of, use something other than an orange, a different fruit. You could use something in place of the avocado. You could use broccoli in there. It's really up to you how you want to make the salad your own. So you can use this as a guide and find your own favorites, use what's on hand to make it as well. And then same with these pastas down here. They have specific vegetables that they call for, or beans that they call for, but you could change that to fit what you have on hand and what you enjoy in your foods. So this is just some examples of how to make those recipes your own, and making sure, again, I think omelets are great for using what you have on hand, the extra veggies that are in the fridge, or that type of thing. So just something to keep in mind there. And then I wanted to share with you some simple Medway swaps. So again, these are both recipes from our site, but they take a very traditional food that you might think of, like this would be a PB&J, right? A peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but instead of the jelly, they use apple slices. So by doing that in whole grain bread as well. So you're eating the Medway, and it's a very simple swap. But by doing that, you're cutting out those added sugars. And by using whole grain bread, you're cutting out refined grains and using that whole grain bread. And then, oops, sorry, I keep doing that. The next one is olive oil toast. So in place of toast with butter on it, this is brushing olive oil onto your toast. And this is a delicious option. I've heard many people just really express their real like for this once they had tried it. They were skeptical, and then they tried the olive oil toast, and they just really fell in love with it. So again, just a simple way to switch out, you know, the fat that you might be using, like butter, and switching it towards a healthy fat like olive oil, or vegetable oil or canola oil as well. So, and then the next one is, again, simple Medway swaps, but this is very simple to do, but might be it might seem a little more in depth than the last swaps we talked about. So for salad dressings, making your own salad dressings, and we have plenty of recipes, salad dressing recipes on our site. So using an acid and oil and seasoning, putting it in a jar and shaking that up or stirring it, literally takes 5 minutes or less, 2 minutes to make a salad dressing, and you get away from all of those added sugars and things that are in store-bought dressing. And plus, this is a great way to save money as well. And it's something that you can put in your fridge for a week, 2 weeks to have dressing as well once you've made it. So something to keep in mind. And then again, another make your own suggestion are beverages, which we have, again, multiple beverage options, even more than, I think we also have a strawberry mint water on our site. So some delicious non-sugar added beverage recipes that are up there, and a great way, especially if one of the changes they're trying to make is move away from sugar sweetened beverages. This can be a great recipe or great recipes to turn to or to try. And I'd encourage you even to, you know, put some cucumber citrus water out during one of your classes, right, during the Faithful Families class, so that people can try it. So just some ways to get people moving towards the Medway of eating. And that's all I have for you today. But Laura Lee is going to share more on recipe adaptation. And I will go ahead and let it turn over to Laura Lee. So thank you.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? So what I want to do is I want to share with you really some specifics regarding how to eat the Medway using the recipes that you have in your Faithful Families curriculum. So how do we actually adapt those recipes for low-income families and follow the Mediterranean style of eating? The first thing to share with you is that all of the recipes developed in your curriculum are developed to be very adaptable, very flexible recipes. Some will go through one by one, just a couple of ideas that you could do for each of these recipes, but you can think of other things beyond this. Any of the concepts and strategies shared by Zandra is going to work with each of these recipes. So with the mini meatloaves, you can replace half of the ground meat with mushrooms. We already use a very low amount of meat compared to what people typically use, but we can replace half of that with mushrooms. If you choose to do that, one of the things that I suggest is that you really chop the mushrooms up finely, cook them down first, and then drain them pretty well and let them cool before you mix them with the ground beef. So that suggestion takes a few steps, but definitely worth it, and the flavor is outstanding. If you choose to do it that way, you could even make these into meatballs and serve them in a sauce over whole grain fettuccine or a whole grain pasta, kind of like a stroganoff. The other thing that you could do is the salsa in and of itself is an addition of vegetables. If you add black beans to that salsa, you've got the beans in there. You could replace the salsa also with like a cooked sweet potato, green onions, and fresh ginger. It gives this particular recipe kind of an Asian flavor, and it's really delicious. Our tuna burgers, again, the tuna is already one of the recommendations that you would find in the Mediterranean style of eating. But just like the tuna salad beefed up with additional veggies and olive oil, you could do this same concept with the tuna burgers. So consider additions to this recipe like carrots or olives or peppers. And then also with all of our recipes for our faithful families, and actually for the program that I coordinate, the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, we built our recipes around that main dish because our families tend to plan their meals around the main dish. But we always want our families, no matter what program we're leading, we want them to consider the whole plate. So always do consider the rest of that plate. These burgers, these tuna burgers, can be made with salmon. They can be made with lean chicken. They can be served with a nice dinner type salad that uses an olive oil dressing and just a lot of delicious vegetables. So there are many options for those burgers. For the easy lasagna and beefy skillet dinner, of course, use whole grain pasta. You again can replace half of the ground meat with mushrooms. In this case, you wouldn't necessarily have to cook that in advance because it's going to cook all at once in these dishes. Consider some additions to this, though. Consider things like leafy greens, such as kale and spinach. That would be absolutely yummy in either one of these recipes. Olives and peppers are another good addition to both of these recipes. The flavor profile works really well with that. The chicken and broccoli quiche, the suggestion here is to go crustless. This recipe cooks up very nicely with or without a crust. You can always boost the vegetables and then consider the side dishes. For the fruit smoothies, I would capitalize on the fruits in season. The fruit smoothies work really, really nice, but you can also add veggies into that fruit smoothie. So try combinations like strawberries and kale or mango and carrots. And then you're getting kind of the best of both worlds. For the oven-baked chicken nuggets, you may want to consider making these on a skewer and having them instead of like a crispy, you may want to actually broil them with roasted vegetables. You could serve them with a side salad with oil and vinegar dressing. These tend to be a favorite of the kids because they mimic something that they're very familiar with. And so if this is the reason that you are serving this, or it is the reason that we created it for the recipe, I would really consider what I'm serving with the chicken nuggets and trying to make that whole plate closer to a Mediterranean style of eating. You also have these two recipes, chicken and fruit salad and the super stir fry. And you can see by just looking at these recipes, we're already there with these two recipes. Again, any combination of vegetables that makes the super stir fry affordable, that are accessible, that are convenient. The biggest thing that I would tell you about the super stir fry is just to try to include a wide variety of colors of fresh veggies. For the chicken and fruit salad, and let me go back to the super stir fry, if fresh is not available or fresh is not affordable, frozen vegetables work in the super stir fry just as well. For the chicken and fruit salad, any fruit works. Add oranges, add apples, whatever you want to put with that particular chicken salad. It's already a version that would complement the Mediterranean style of eating. And that's it for me. I'll turn it back over to Julia.
Lorelei and Sandra, thank you so much for sharing those great tips and resources. We have about 10 minutes left of the webinar. We would love to open up the floor for any questions that you guys have. So there's a question box that you'll find somewhere on your, either on the right or left side of your screen. So if you have any questions about what Lorelei and Sandra have presented today and the resources that they shared. This would be a great time for you guys to type in that question, and I'll give everyone a minute or two to do that before we start answering some questions. So Lorelei and Sandra, we have a question about whether or not these recipes are available in Spanish.
So I will answer for the ones that you have for Faithful Families. All of those recipes are available in Spanish.
Yeah, and in regards to the Mediterranean, the Medway recipes, we currently do not have those in Spanish, but that's something that may occur in the future, for sure. But for now, the recipes that we have are all posted on our website. And I'm sure once if we were to have Spanish available, we would post it there as well once they're available. But we don't have that in the works right now.
So if you need a Spanish version of the Faithful Families recipes, you should be able to contact should be able to get those either through Julia or through Annie. You can also go on to the FNET website. That website is ncefnep.org. And if you go under our partners portal and then to our curriculum and materials, you'll find links for our handouts there. You can choose either English or Spanish.
And I can send a link. This is Juliet. I can send a link out for all of these, for all the Spanish resources and everything, all the resources that Lorelei and Sandra shared today. So you'll receive a follow-up email after this webinar ends and in the next couple of days or so, and it'll have the link to the Spanish resources as well. So we have another question. When substituting or adding olives or olive oil, doesn't one still need to be careful to not have too much since it's fattening?
I will take that. So with olive oil, the idea behind the Mediterranean diet, and I would encourage people to watch those webinars as well. There's one webinar that specifically talks about swapping your fats, which I think would be helpful for this question to go a little more in depth even after we get off the webinar today. But the idea behind the Medway, as well as the research, shows that it's not necessarily, it's the types of fat that we are consuming that are important, not necessarily high fat being necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. So what I mean by that is the Medway and what research shows us is that we should be concentrating on eating unsaturated fats, so fats that come from typically from vegetable sources, so things like olive oil, vegetable oil, and we should be limiting to not consuming, so limiting as much as possible to even not consuming saturated fats, which what that is things that come from an animal source largely, so things like red meats, butter, lard. Those are the types of fats that are connected with heart disease and chronic disease and such. But so the idea is to swap the fats you're eating. So from going from saturated fats like butter, red meat, and switching to healthier fats like olive oil, vegetable oil, even seafood. So seafood and white meat, poultry would be in that as well. So, or nuts being a healthy fat. So it's not necessarily what research shows us is that it's not necessarily the total fat in your diet. That was something that was thought for a long time. That used to be the conventional wisdom, but newer research and shows us that it's not total fat, it's the type of fat. And what should be of concern is saturated fat, and that's what should be limited. So consuming olive oil it's a healthy fat, it's a healthy choice. So if you make that switch from saturated to unsaturated, mono and polyunsaturated fats, that is where the goal is and what the research supports. So again, not the total fat that matters, the type of fat is what matters. So again, I'd encourage you to watch that webinar on fats for the Medway series. You can link to it from the insteadofmeds.com, and it's the Swap Your Fats webinar. That'll give you a lot more detail into the literature around fat consumption and the types of fats that we should be consuming and the types of fats we should be limiting. So I hope that helped, but let me know if there's further questions on that.
Thanks, Sandra. When will the curriculum be available for agents to use?
Yeah, so we are, the curriculum is in its final stages of development, and for those who might not be in North Carolina, I don't know where people are on this webinar, we're in the process of creating a Med Instead of Meds curriculum for family and consumer science agents in North Carolina. And the plan for release is the end of this year, with trainings for agents that would also occur at the end of this year, and we'll be making announcements about that very soon, so as soon as all of the scheduling is completed there.
Yeah, that's great. And if someone in one of the classes asks about an alternative to using mushrooms with some of the Faithful Families recipe adaptations, as well as the mushroom taco and mushroom burger, what is a good recommendation?
Well, I would say the reason we do mushroom with the taco and the burger is because mushrooms have such a meaty taste to them. So I don't have off the top of my head for that specific replacement another option per se if you're not a mushroom fan. Lauralee, are you aware of one?
So I wouldn't replace the mushroom with a different option for the very reason that Sandra stated. But like if you were doing the mini meatloaves, I have replaced I haven't replaced the meat, but I have replaced the salsa with a cooked sweet potato, the version that I shared with you. So it was a mini meatloaf, but with a lot more veggie power.
And I would say too, I mean, we don't have recipes for this specifically, but you could also try to boost vegetables by trying it out and seeing what you like. But that's not a recommendation per se, as much as, playing around with seeing what other vegetable additions you might be able to do. But
there are some on the market. There are some products that are plant-based for vegetarians, and they're made to react very much like ground meat. I have not tried that because I'd rather use the vegetables, but that could potentially be an option for some people.
And that actually reminds me of one other thing. On our Med Instead of Med sites under recipes, we have at least 2, if not 3, bean burger options. So I know there's a now I'm going to forget the name. It's, mushroom almond, but that has mushrooms in it. But a pinto bean burger, we have that on our site, which includes mashed up beans as well as, I forget the whole grain. I want to say it's quinoa to make the burger patty. So you could also go, this wouldn't be replacing half the meat like those other recipes, but you could go full bean on it and, do a bean burger.
I'm glad you said that because we actually have another recipe, and it triggered a memory. We actually have another recipe in FNAP where we do replace half the meat with beans. It's a sloppy Joe recipe, so it's a sloppy Joe with beans. So it is possible to try that.
And we have our last question. Will limiting red meats and increasing vegetables provide enough iron for those that are prone to anemia?
Could you repeat your question, Julie? I didn't hear it.
Sure, yeah. Will limiting red meats and increasing vegetables provide enough iron for those that are prone to anemia?
Okay. When it comes to specific health concerns that might be specific to an individual, I would recommend talking to your doctor to make sure that any diet pattern that you're on fits those needs. So if you're anemic or have concerns with anemia, that might be something to speak with your physician, with your care provider, just to make sure that whatever you're eating fits what those needs are. But I can say in a general sense, limiting or eliminating saturated fats, particularly red meats or processed meats, is a pretty general healthy eating recommendation across the board. But again, when it comes to an individual specific concern around your specific health, I would ask your provider.
And I would echo what Zandra has said. I would say that someone with a specific health condition may require different recommendations, but in general, you can get iron from a variety of sources. It does not have to be red meat. So the omelet that she showed with the cooked spinach itself is a really good source of iron. There's some iron in the egg. Many of our whole grains are fortified with iron as well. So there are multiple. Dry beans are a great source of iron. So there are multiple foods within this Mediterranean eating pattern that are really good sources of iron.
Thank you both so much. I know we're at the end of our time here, but before we end the webinar, I just wanted to quickly remind everyone that we have our last Faithful Families webinar coming up on November 7th, and you'll hear about strategies to engage with local partners in your faith-based health promotion programs. And so the registration for the upcoming webinar, along with all the links that we just mentioned, that Lauralee and Sandra shared with you all today, will be sent in a follow-up email. And we'll have this webinar presentation and this recording available to view and download on the Faithful Families website by the end of this week. So our email addresses are up on the screen. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out about today's information and the things that we discussed. Thank you, Lauralee and Zandra, for such a great webinar, and thank you for being here today, everyone. I hope you have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.